Deep in the misty hills of Dunmere, a priceless golden torque vanishes from an archaeological dig, plunging the village into a web of suspicion. Was it Dr. Evelyn Hart, the driven archaeologist guarding her legacy? Sir Reginald Vance, the boastful funder craving glory? Tom Brodie, the loyal worker hiding a secret? Or Lionel Gray, the shadowy collector with a private museum? Only Miss Jane Marple, with her knitting needles and razor-sharp mind, can unravel the desires and deceits behind the theft. In a village where every glance hides a motive, the truth is a treasure waiting to be unearthed. Chapter 1. The Dig at Dunmere. The late summer sun cast a golden haze over the hills of Dunmere, a sleepy village nestled in a fold of the English countryside, where time seemed to linger like dust on an old book. Beyond the stone walls of Conway Hall, where Miss Jane Marple sat knitting in the airy drawing-room of her old friend, Lady Beatrice Conway, the earth was yielding secrets long buried. A small archaeological dig, tucked in a meadow below the hall, buzzed with quiet purpose. Dr. Evelyn Hart, a wiry, bespectacled woman with an air of fierce determination, led the excavation of a 5th-century Celtic shrine, unearthing fragments of pottery, bronze pins, and whispered tales of a treasure, a golden torque, its intricate knots said to bind the wearer to ancient gods. Miss Marple's needles clicked in a steady rhythm, her mild blue eyes drifting from her wool to the window, where the dig's tents dotted the green like mushrooms after rain. Lady Beatrice, a robust woman with silver hair and a voice that carried the authority of her ancestral estate, poured tea with a clink of porcelain. "Jane, you should see the excitement down there," she said, her eyes bright with local pride. "Evelyn's found something extraordinary, a torque, they say, fit for a chieftain. The village can talk of nothing else." Miss Marple smiled, her expression as soft as the shawl taking shape in her hands. "A treasure like that, Beatrice, stirs more than curiosity. It pulls at the heart, and not always for the best reasons." Her words were gentle, but her mind, sharp as ever, sifted through the undertones of Beatrice's chatter. In St. Mary Mead, she had seen how a rare find, a silver locket, a hidden will, could unsettle even the quietest souls. Greed, she knew, wore many masks. Beatrice set down her teacup, her rings catching the light. Evelyn's beside herself with worry, though she won't admit it. Too many strangers poking about the dig, reporters, collectors, even that pompous Sir Reginald Vance who's funding the whole affair. And then there's that odd man, Lionel Gray, always lurking with his notebooks. Says he's a scholar, but I don't trust those cold eyes of his. Miss Marple's needles paused just for a moment. "A collector, you say?" Her voice was mild, but her memory flickered to a saint. Mary Mead widow, who hoarded antique cameos, her obsession veiling a deeper loneliness. "And who else is at the dig?" "Oh, the usual sort," Beatrice replied, waving a hand. "Young Tom Brodie, a local lad, strong as an ox but a bit simple. He's one of Evelyn's workers, always hauling dirt or guarding the finds. Evelyn trusts him, but I wonder if he's sharp enough to notice trouble." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Mark my words, Jane, that torque has brought a shadow to Dunmere. I feel it in my bones." The drawing-room door creaked open, admitting a maid with a tray of scones. Miss Marple thanked her with a nod, noting the girl's nervous glance toward the window. "Is the village uneasy, Beatrice?" she asked, her tone as casual as if she were inquiring about the weather. Beatrice sighed. "You know how people talk. They say the torse is cursed, that it vanished once before, centuries ago, and brought ruin to those who sought it. Nonsense, of course, but it makes the dig feel watched. She shivered, despite the warm room. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her thoughts weaving a pattern as intricate as the wool. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead Gardner, who swore a buried coin brought bad luck, though it was his own pilfering that caused the trouble. Superstition, she knew, often cloaked human failings. "Perhaps I might visit the dig," she said, her voice soft. "It sounds most instructive." Beatrice clapped her hands. "Oh, you must. Evelyn will be thrilled, though she's prickly with strangers. I'll take you tomorrow." She hesitated, then added, "But Jane, keep your eyes open. I don't like the way things feel." Miss Marple's smile was serene, but her mind was already at work, sorting the players in this quiet drama. Dr. Hart, ambitious and guarded; Sir Reginald, wealthy and perhaps too proud; Tom Brodie, earnest but poor; and Mr. Gray, with his scholar's guise and collector's heart. The torque, she suspected, was not just a relic but a mirror, reflecting the desires of those who coveted it. As the sun dipped below Dunmere's hills, casting long shadows over the dig, Miss Marple's needles clicked on, a quiet counterpoint to the gathering storm she sensed in the village below. Chapter 2. The Vanishing. The morning mist clung to the meadows of Dunmere like a reluctant guest, softening the edges of the archaeological dig where Dr. Evelyn Hart's team toiled. Miss Jane Marple, seated in Lady Beatrice Conway's drawing room at Conway Hall, was adjusting her shawl when the heavy oak door burst open. Tom Brodie, a young worker from the dig, stood panting in the threshold, his ruddy face streaked with dirt and his eyes wide with alarm. His boots, caked with mud, left smudges on the polished floor, a detail Miss Marple noted with a quiet flick of her eyes. "Lady Beatrice," Tom gasped, clutching his cap. "It's gone. The torque, stolen from the tent last night." His voice cracked, carrying the raw edge of a man unaccustomed to delivering such news. Beatrice, halfway through pouring tea, froze, the silver teapot trembling in her hands. Miss Marple's needles paused mid-stitch, her serene expression undisturbed, though her mind quickened like a clock wound tight. "Stolen?" Beatrice's voice rose, sharp with disbelief. "Tom, are you certain? That tent was locked, wasn't it?" She set the teapot down with a clatter, her rings flashing as she gestured for the young man to sit. He remained standing, shifting from foot to foot, his hands twisting the cap into a crumpled knot. "Aye, milady," Tom said, his Dunmere accent thick. "I locked it myself, just as Dr. Hart told me. But this morning, the lock was busted, forced open like. The box where the torque was kept, empty as a church on Monday." His eyes darted to Miss Marple, as if seeking reassurance from the quiet old lady with her knitting, but she merely tilted her head, her gaze gentle yet piercing. Beatrice sank into her chair, her face pale beneath her powder. "This is dreadful, Jane," she murmured. "Evelyn will be devastated. That torque's was her triumph." She turned to Tom. "Fetch Doctor Hart at once. Tell her to come here, and mind you don't spread this about the village. Not yet." Tom nodded, jamming his cap back on, and hurried out, leaving a trail of muddy footprints. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the soft click of her needles a steady rhythm against the sudden tension in the room. "A theft like this," she said mildly, "is rarely simple, Beatrice. A locked tent, a forced lock, someone knew exactly what they were after." Beatrice wrung her hands. "But who would dare? The dig's guarded at night, and Evelyn's so careful. Oh, Jane, this could ruin her career." Her voice trembled with loyalty to her friend, but Miss Marple noted the undercurrent of fear, as if Beatrice sensed the theft was more than a random act. Within the hour, Dr. Evelyn Hart arrived, her thin frame taut with agitation. Her tweed jacket was askew, and her spectacles sat crookedly on her nose, as if she'd dressed in haste. "Beatrice," she said, her voice clipped, "it's a disaster. The torque, gone. The lock was smashed, the box pried open. I've searched the tent, the crates, everything. It's vanished." She sank into a chair, her hands clenching the armrests. Miss Marple observed the faint tremor in those hands, the way Evelyn's eyes avoided meeting Beatrice's. Was it shame, she wondered, or something deeper? "Tell me everything, Evelyn," Beatrice urged, pouring a cup of tea that Evelyn ignored. "When was the torque last seen?" Evelyn pushed a strand of graying hair from her face. "Last night, just before we closed up. I checked the box myself at 8 o'clock, after the workers left. Tom locked the tent, as always. I went to my cottage, and this morning Tom came running to say the lock was broken." Her voice was steady, but Miss Marple caught the slight quiver in her tone, like a violin string plucked too hard. In St. Mary Mead, she had known a schoolmistress whose calm exterior hid a scandal. Evelyn's strain suggested more than professional loss. Miss Marple set her knitting in her lap. "And no one saw anything unusual last night, Doctor?" "Hart?" Her question was soft, almost apologetic, but her eyes were sharp as she watched Evelyn's reaction. Evelyn hesitated, her fingers tightening on the chair. "No one said anything. The night watchman, old Mr. Caulfield, was at his post, but he's half deaf and nods off sometimes. I've asked the team. Nothing." Her gaze flickered to the window, where the dig's tents were just visible through the mist. Miss Marple noted that glance, filing it away like a scrap of wool to be woven later. Beatrice, pacing now, turned to Miss Marple. "Jane, you must come to the dig. You've a knack for seeing things others miss. Remember that business with the vicar's missing collection plate?" Her tone was half pleading, half confident, as if she believed the quiet spinster could unravel any mystery. Miss Marple smiled, her expression as mild as milk. "I'm no detective, Beatrice, merely an observer of human nature. But I'd be delighted to see the dig." She gathered her knitting, her mind already turning over the players in this drama. Evelyn, with her guarded air. Tom, earnest but nervous. Sir Reginald Vance, the funder whose wealth might mask ambition. And Lionel Gray, the collector whose interest in the torques seemed more than academic. By noon, Miss Marple and Beatrice arrived at the dig, a patchwork of trenches and canvas tents in the meadow below Conway Hall. The air smelled of damp earth and anticipation, though the workers moved with a subdued air, their chatter muted by the theft. Evelyn led them to the main tent, a sturdy structure secured with ropes. Inside, a table held tools, notebooks, and an empty wooden box, its lid splintered where a crowbar had done its work. The lock on the tent flap hung askew, its metal twisted. Miss Marple bent to examine the lock, her movements slow and deliberate. "A determined thief," she murmured, "but not a subtle one. This was no master criminal, merely someone with purpose." She straightened, her eyes scanning the tent's interior, noting the neatly labeled crates, the meticulous notes in Evelyn's hand. Everything spoke of order, yet the theft suggested chaos or calculation. Outside, Tom Brodie was shoveling dirt, his face flushed with effort. Miss Marple approached, her umbrella shielding her from the drizzle that had replaced the mist. "You locked the tent last night, Tom?" she asked, her voice kind, as if inquiring about his health. "Aye, miss," he said, leaning on his shovel. "Same as every night. Keys kept in Dr. Hart's lockbox, and I give it to her after. I swear I did it proper." His eyes were wide, almost pleading, and Miss Marple noted the faint tremble in his hands, the way his gaze flicked toward the tent. Fear, she thought, or guilt? In St. Mary Mead, a young grocer's boy had trembled just so when caught pilfering apples, though his crime was born of hunger, not malice. "And you saw nothing unusual?" she pressed gently. Tom shook his head, but his hesitation was a beat too long. "Well, there was a man, a few days back, near the dig. Dark coat, fancy hat. Not one of us. I told Dr. Hart, but she said it was likely Mr. Gray poking about." He shrugged, but his unease lingered, like a shadow on the grass. Miss Marple thanked him and turned to Beatrice, who was speaking with Evelyn near a trench. "This Mr. Gray," she said softly. "He's taken quite an interest in the dig, hasn't he?" Beatrice nodded, her lips pursed. "Lionel Gray's a queer sort, Jane. Lives in that big manor on the hill, full of odd statues and things. Says he's a scholar, but I've heard he buys artifacts on the quiet. He was here 3 days ago, asking Evelyn all sorts of questions about the torque." Her tone was disapproving, and Miss Marple filed this away, recalling a St. Mary Mead antique dealer whose scholarly airs hid a knack for shady deals. As they walked back to the tent, Sir Reginald Vance's Rolls-Royce pulled up, its polished chrome gleaming despite the gray day. The man himself emerged, a portly figure in a tailored suit, his mustache quivering with indignation. "Dr. Hart," he bellowed, striding toward them. "What's this about the torque? My investment stolen? This is outrageous." His voice carried across the dig, drawing curious glances from the workers. Evelyn's face tightened, but she met his gaze. "We're doing all we can, Sir Reginald. The constable's been called and we're searching the site." Her tone was professional, but Miss Marple caught the strain beneath it, like a wire stretched near breaking. Sir Reginald turned to Beatrice, his charm resurfacing like a well-rehearsed act. "Lady Beatrice, a tragedy. That torque was to be the jewel of the county museum." His eyes flicked to Miss Marple, taking in her plain hat and knitting bag. "And who's this?" "Miss Jane Marple, a dear friend," Beatrice said, her tone firm. "She's visiting from St. Mary Mead and has a sharp eye for detail." Sir Reginald's smile was patronizing. "Charming, I'm sure, but this is a matter for professionals, not village spinsters." He turned back to Evelyn, dismissing Miss Marple with a wave. She merely smiled, her needles clicking as she stood by the tent, unnoticed yet noting everything. Sir Reginald's bluster, Evelyn's tension, Tom's fidgeting in the distance. The village constable, a stout man named Perkins, arrived shortly after, his notebook already open. He questioned Evelyn and Tom, his questions plodding but thorough. "No witnesses, no footprints," he muttered, scratching his head. "Odd that. Ground soft from the rain, should have been marks." Miss Marple, lingering nearby, tilted her head. "No footprints?" Either the thief was clever, or the rain had been kinder to them than to the truth. As the afternoon wore on, the dig's atmosphere grew heavier, the workers' glances furtive, their voices hushed. Miss Marple, walking back to Conway Hall with Beatrice, let her eyes roam the meadow, noting the paths leading to the village, the woods, and the distant manor where Lionel Gray lived. "A bold theft," she said softly. but not a careless one. Someone knew the Torque's value and the tent's routine. Beatrice shivered, pulling her coat tighter. "Jane, you make it sound so calculated. Do you think it's one of them? Evelyn, Tom, Sir Reginald, or that gray fellow?" Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "People, Beatrice, are rarely what they seem. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a choir boy who stole from the poor box, not for greed, but to buy his sister medicine. Motives hide in plain sight." She paused, her gaze distant. "We must watch and listen. The truth will show itself, as it always does." Back at Conway Hall, as the fire crackled and Beatrice fretted, Miss Marple sat knitting, her mind a loom weaving threads of suspicion. Evelyn's strained composure, Tom's nervous glances, Sir Reginald's bluster, and Gray's shadowy interest, each was a piece of the puzzle. The Torque, she knew, was more than gold. It was a magnet for human weakness. As the mist thickened outside, cloaking Dunmere in secrecy, Miss Marple's needles clicked on, a quiet promise that no secret would remain hidden for long. Chapter 3. The Archaeologist's Burden. The drizzle had ceased by mid-morning, leaving Dunmere's meadows glistening under a tentative sun. Miss Jane Marple, her umbrella tucked under one arm and her knitting bag swinging gently, followed Lady Beatrice Conway down the winding path to the archaeological dig. The air carried the sharp scent of turned earth, mingling with the faint tang of canvas from the tents. Dr. Evelyn Hart was already there, her thin frame bent over a trench, barking orders to a pair of workers sifting through soil. Her movements were brisk, almost feverish, as if the theft of the golden Torque could be undone by sheer force of will. Miss Marple, pausing to adjust her hat, noted the archaeologist's flushed cheeks and the way her hands gripped a trowel as though it were an anchor in a storm. Beatrice, her silver hair catching the light, approached Evelyn with a sympathetic smile. "Evelyn, dear, you mustn't drive yourself to exhaustion. Jane's come to see the dig. She's terribly interested." Her tone was warm, but Miss Marple caught the faint edge of concern, as if Beatrice feared her friend might snap under the strain. Evelyn straightened, pushing her spectacles up her nose. "Interested, is she?" Her voice was sharp, her eyes narrowing as they flicked to Miss Marple. "No offense, Miss Marple, but this isn't a tea party. We're in crisis. Here." The words were curt, but Miss Marple's mild smile remained unruffled. She had met such defensiveness before, in a St. Mary Mead seamstress, whose sharp tongue hid a fear of ruin after a botched commission. "I quite understand, Doctor." "Hart," Miss Marple said, her voice soft as a summer breeze. "A loss like this must be dreadful. I only wish to observe, if I may. I find people's work so illuminating." Her eyes, bright and keen behind their gentle facade, met Evelyn's, and for a moment the archaeologist's gaze faltered, as if sensing an unexpected scrutiny. Evelyn gave a tight nod and turned back to her trench, but Miss Marple lingered, her attention drawn to the dig's orderly chaos. Workers moved with purpose, their tools scraping against stone and clay, yet an undercurrent of unease hung over the site. The empty box in the main tent, its splintered lid a silent accusation, seemed to cast a shadow longer than the morning sun warranted. Miss Marple's needles, tucked in her bag, itched to be taken up, but her hands remained still, her mind weaving instead. As Beatrice chatted with a worker about pottery shards, Miss Marple strolled toward the main tent, her steps slow and deliberate. She paused by a crate labeled bronze fragments. noting the meticulous labels in Evelyn's precise handwriting. Everything here spoke of control, yet the theft suggested a breach in that order. "You seem troubled, Doctor." "Heart," she said, approaching Evelyn, who was now examining a notebook with fierce concentration. More than one might expect, perhaps, for a stolen artifact. Evelyn's head snapped up, her lips thinning. "Of course I'm troubled. That torque was the find of my career. Its loss could ruin me, my funding, my reputation, all of it." Her voice cracked, and she turned away, her shoulders rigid. Miss Marple noted the way Evelyn's fingers clutched the notebook, the knuckles white. In St. Mary Mead, she had known a vicar's wife whose fierce grip on a hymn book betrayed a secret debt. Evelyn's strain hinted at something beyond professional pride. "Reputation is a fragile thing," Miss Marple said gently, as if musing aloud. "But you've built yours on such careful work. Surely one theft cannot undo that." Her tone was kind, but her eyes were sharp, watching for the flicker of truth beneath Evelyn's composure. Evelyn's gaze darted toward the horizon, where Sir Reginald Vance's Rolls-Royce was just pulling into view, its chrome glinting like a beacon. A shadow crossed her face. Fear, perhaps, or resentment. "It's not just the torque," she muttered, almost to herself. "It's what it represents. Years of work, grants, promises, all hanging by a thread." She caught herself and forced a tight smile. "Forgive me, Miss Marple. I'm not myself today." Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic, but her mind catalogued the moment. Evelyn's words carried weight, as if the Torque's theft threatened more than her career. A debt, perhaps, or a promise made to the wrong person. In St. Mary Mead, a baker's wife had spoken of promises when her husband's gambling debts came to light. Miss Marple filed the thought away, her gaze drifting to Sir Reginald as he stepped from his car. The funder's arrival was a performance, his booming voice cutting through the dig's quiet hum. "Evelyn, any news of our torque?" he called, striding forward with the confidence of a man accustomed to command. His tailored coat strained slightly at the waist, and his mustache quivered with a mix of indignation and theatrical concern. Miss Marple, standing quietly by the tent, noted the way Evelyn stiffened at his approach, her hands smoothing her jacket as if to brace herself. "We're searching, Sir Reginald," Evelyn said, her tone clipped. "The constable's been through, but there's no trace yet." Her eyes flicked to Miss Marple, as if wary of being overheard, and Miss Marple pretended to study a nearby trench, her ears sharp. Sir Reginald's gaze swept the site, lingering on the workers, who seemed to shrink under his scrutiny. "This is a scandal," he declared, his voice carrying to the farthest trench. "I've poured thousands into this dig, Evelyn. That torque was to be my legacy. The museum's, of course." His correction was swift, but Miss Marple caught the slip, her lips curving slightly. A street Mary Mead banker had once spoken of charity while funneling funds to his own coffers. Sir Reginald's pride suggested a similar possessiveness. Beatrice, joining them, frowned at Sir Reginald's tone. "It's a blow to us all, Sir Reginald," she said, her voice firm. "But Evelyn's doing her best. Perhaps you could help by speaking to the constable again?" Her suggestion was polite, but Miss Marple sensed her friend's irritation at the man's bluster. Sir Reginald waved a hand, dismissing the idea. "I've no time for plotting constables. Evelyn, you must double the watch tonight. We can't have more losses." He turned away, his attention caught by a worker uncovering a shard of pottery, leaving Evelyn to exhale sharply, her composure fraying. Miss Marple, stepping closer, spoke softly. "He seems very invested, Doctor. Hart, has Sir Reginald always been so involved?" Her question was innocent, but her eyes missed nothing. The way Evelyn's fingers tightened on her trowel, the quick glance toward the retreating funder. "He's the money," Evelyn said curtly. "Without him, there's no dig, but he thinks his gold buys control." Her bitterness was fleeting, but Miss Marple caught it, like a glint of sunlight on broken glass. A street Mary Mead shopkeeper had once spoken so of a wealthy patron, resenting the strings attached to generosity. Was Sir Reginald's funding a leash, or had Evelyn given him reason to tighten it? As the morning wore on, Miss Marple wandered the dig, her unassuming presence allowing her to blend into the background. She paused by Tom Brodie, who was hauling a bucket of earth, his face red with effort. "You've a strong arm, Tom," she said kindly, her umbrella tapping the ground. "It must be hard, keeping up with all this after such a shock." Tom wiped his brow, his grin shy but strained. "Aye, miss, Dr. Hart's got us working double to make up for it. I just wish I'd seen something last night." His eyes flicked to the main tent, where the broken lock still hung, and Miss Marple noted the nervous twitch in his jaw. Fear of blame, she wondered, or something more. "You mentioned a man in a dark coat," she said, her tone conversational. "Could it have been Sir Reginald? Perhaps checking on his investment?" Her suggestion was gentle, but Tom's reaction was immediate. A quick shake of his head, his hands tightening on the bucket. "No, miss, not him. Sir Reginald's too loud to sneak about. This fellow was quiet, like a shadow. I only saw him from afar, near the woods." His voice dropped, as if the memory unsettled him. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to Lionel Grey, the collector Beatrice had described with such distrust. A shadow, indeed, she thought, recalling a St. Mary Mead poacher who moved silently to avoid the gamekeeper. Beatrice called her over to inspect a newly uncovered bronze pin, and Miss Marple went, her thoughts weaving a pattern from the morning's observations. Evelyn's agitation, Sir Reginald's possessiveness, Tom's unease. Each was a thread, distinct yet connected. The Torca's theft was no random act. It required knowledge of the dig's routines and the courage to act under cover of night. As she admired the pin, her fingers itching for her needles, Miss Marple's eyes strayed to the distant manor on the hill, where Lionel Grey's secrets lay hidden behind locked doors. Back at Conway Hall for luncheon, Beatrice fretted over the dig's future, her hands fluttering like birds. "Jane, what do you make of it all? Evelyn's a wreck, Sir Reginald's insufferable, and Tom, well, he's a good lad, but he's hiding something, I'm sure of it." Her voice was low, as if the walls might carry her words to the village. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression serene. "People are often their own worst enemies, Beatrice. They guard their secrets too fiercely, and that's what betrays them." She paused, her eyes twinkling. In St. Mary Mead, a postmistress once lost a valuable package and blamed a thief, but it was her own forgetfulness that hid it in a drawer. We must look closely, not just at the crime, but at the people around it. Beatrice leaned forward, her eyes wide. "You think one of them did it? Evelyn, perhaps, to hide some mistake. Or Sir Reginald, for his precious legacy?" Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "I think, Beatrice, that the truth is like a buried artifact, waiting to be uncovered, if one knows where to dig." Her needles, now in her hands, clicked softly, a quiet promise that the archaeologist's burden would soon reveal its deeper roots. Chapter 4. The Funder's Charm. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over Dunmere's meadows, where the archaeological dig continued its subdued rhythm. Miss Jane Marple, seated on a folding chair just outside the main tent, her knitting bag at her feet, observed the scene with the quiet attentiveness of a bird-watcher. The workers moved with mechanical precision, their shovels and trowels scraping against the earth, but the air was thick with unspoken questions about the stolen torque. Lady Beatrice Conway, standing nearby, fanned herself with a folded newspaper, her silver hair glinting as she chatted with Dr. Evelyn Hart about the dig's progress. Miss Marple's eyes, however, were drawn to the crunch of gravel on the path, heralding the arrival of Sir Reginald Vance's Rolls-Royce, its polished chrome a stark contrast to the muddy trenches. Sir Reginald emerged with the flourish of a stage actor, his portly frame clad in a suit that strained at the seams, his mustache bristling with self-assured authority. "Evelyn," he boomed, striding toward the tent, his voice carrying over the dig like a foghorn. "I trust you've made progress on our little catastrophe?" His tone was jovial, but Miss Marple noted the edge beneath it, like a blade wrapped in velvet. Evelyn, brushing dirt from her hands, stiffened, her spectacles catching the light as she turned to face him. "We're doing all we can, Sir Reginald," she said, her voice taut as a bowstring. "The constable's been through twice today, and we've searched every crate. No sign of the torque." Her fingers twitched, as if longing to return to her work, and Miss Marple, her needles still in her bag, observed the faint flush creeping up Evelyn's neck. A street Mary Mead grocer had shown such a flush when pressed about missing funds. It spoke of pressure, not necessarily guilt. Sir Reginald's eyes swept the dig, lingering on the workers, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "This is intolerable," he declared, planting his hands on his hips. "I've invested a small fortune in this venture, Evelyn. That torque was to be the centerpiece of the County Museum's new wing, my gift to posterity." His chest puffed out, but Miss Marple caught the flicker of something in his expression. Pride, yes, but also a possessive gleam, like a child guarding a favorite toy. In St. Mary Mead, a local squire had spoken of public good while coveting a rare painting for his own hall. Sir Reginald's words carried a similar ring. Beatrice, stepping forward, offered a placating smile. "We're all devastated, Sir Reginald, but Evelyn's team is tireless, and Miss Marple here, my friend from St. Mary Mead, has a sharp eye for detail. She's been observing, and I dare say she might notice something we've missed." Her tone was diplomatic, but Miss Marple sensed her friend's subtle jab at Sir Reginald's bluster. Sir Reginald turned to Miss Marple, his eyebrows rising as he took in her plain woolen coat and the knitting bag at her feet. "A village sleuth, eh?" he said, his chuckle patronizing. "Charming, I'm sure, but this is a matter for professionals, Lady Beatrice." He waved a hand, dismissing her as one might a curious child. Miss Marple's smile remained serene, her eyes twinkling with the quiet amusement of one accustomed to being underestimated. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead's solicitor, who had scoffed at her insights, only to find his missing ledger thanks to her village observations. "I'm no sleuth, Sir Reginald," she said, her voice soft as a whisper of silk. "Merely an old lady who notices things. Your passion for the torque is most admirable. It must be a great responsibility funding such a find." Her words were polite, but her gaze was steady, and Sir Reginald's mustache twitched as if he sensed a hidden probe. "Responsibility? Yes," he said, recovering his charm. "I've always believed history must be preserved, Miss Marple. That torque belongs in a museum, not some thief's pocket." He turned to Evelyn, his tone brisk. "Have you questioned that boy, Tom Brody? He's the one who locked the tent, isn't he? Seems a likely sort to fumble the job." Evelyn's lips thinned. "Tom's reliable," she said sharply. "He's been with me for months, and he's no thief." Her defense was quick, almost fierce, and Miss Marple noted the way her eyes darted toward the trench where Tom was working, his shovel moving with dogged rhythm. Was Evelyn protecting the lad, or her own judgment in trusting him? Sir Reginald shrugged, his smile indulgent. "If you say so, Evelyn, but we can't be too careful. That collector, Gray, what's his name, Lionel? He was sniffing around here last week. Shifty fellow, if you ask me. Wouldn't be surprised if he had a hand in this." His voice was loud enough to carry, and Miss Marple saw a worker glance up, his expression curious. Gossip, she knew, spread faster than wildfire in a village like Dunmere. Beatrice frowned, her fan pausing. "Mr. Gray's a scholar, Sir Reginald. He's eccentric, perhaps, but hardly a criminal." Her tone was firm, but Miss Marple caught the flicker of doubt in her eyes. Beatrice had spoken of Gray's cold demeanor, and his manner filled with artifacts. Such a man, Miss Marple mused, might see a torque as more than a scholarly prize. As Sir Reginald launched into a lecture about the importance of security, Miss Marple excused herself, strolling toward the edge of the dig where Tom Brody was piling earth into a wheelbarrow. His jacket was patched, his boots worn, and his face bore the earnest strain of a young man eager to prove himself. "Hard work, this," Miss Marple said, her umbrella tapping the ground as she paused beside him. "You must be proud to be part of such a discovery, Tom." He glanced up, his grin shy but fleeting. "Aye, miss, but it's all gone wrong now, hasn't it? Dr. Hart's in a state, and Sir Reginald's breathing down our necks." His eyes flicked toward the funder, who was now inspecting a trench with an air of ownership. Miss Marple noted the resentment in Tom's tone, faint but unmistakable, like a crack in a teacup. "You mentioned a man in a dark coat," she said, her voice gentle. "Near the woods, wasn't it? Could it have been Sir Reginald, perhaps, checking on his investment?" Her question was casual, but her eyes were sharp, watching Tom's reaction. Tom shook his head, his hands tightening on the shovel. "Not him, miss. Sir Reginald don't move quiet. This fellow was sneaky-like. I only saw him for a moment by the trees, night before last." His voice dropped, and he glanced around as if afraid of being overheard. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to Lionel Gray, whose name kept surfacing like a stone in a stream. A street Mary Mead poacher had moved with such stealth, slipping through shadows to avoid detection. Gray, she suspected, might have a similar knack. As she returned to Beatrice, Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of the village constable, Perkins, his notebook clutched like a talisman. He tipped his hat to Sir Reginald, who greeted him with a hearty clap on the shoulder. "Perkins, my man, tell me you've caught our thief." The constable's face reddened, and he mumbled something about ongoing inquiries, his plodding manner a stark contrast to Sir Reginald's exuberance. Miss Marple, standing quietly by the tent, listened as Perkins questioned Evelyn about the dig's security. "No footprints, you say?" he asked, scratching his head. "Odd, with all this mud." Evelyn nodded, her expression strained, and Miss Marple's mind sharpened. No footprints suggested either a careful thief or a convenient rain, and she recalled a St. Mary Mead burglary, where the lack of tracks pointed to an inside job. That evening, at a dinner hosted by Beatrice at Conway Hall, Sir Reginald dominated the conversation, his voice filling the oak-paneled dining room. "The Torca's loss is a blow to culture," he declared, raising his wine glass. "But I'll see it recovered, mark my words." His eyes gleamed, and Miss Marple, sipping her soup, noted the way he lingered on the empty space above the fireplace, as if imagining the torque displayed there. His charm was polished, but beneath it she sensed a hunger like that of a saint. Mary Mead collector, who coveted a rare coin not for its history, but for its prestige. Evelyn, seated across from him, picked at her food, her silence a stark contrast to Sir Reginald's verbosity. Tom, invited at Beatrice's insistence to ease the workers' morale, sat awkwardly at the table's end, his rough hands folded in his lap. Miss Marple, her needles, clicking softly as she worked on her shawl after dinner, watched them all, her mind weaving their words and glances into a pattern. Sir Reginald's charm, she thought, was a mask, but for what? Pride, greed, or something deeper? As the evening drew to a close, Beatrice drew Miss Marple aside, her face troubled. "Jane, Sir Reginald's all bluster, but he's powerful. If he thinks Evelyn's to blame, he could pull his funding. And Tom? Did you see how he flinched when Sir Reginald mentioned the lock? There's something amiss, I'm sure of it." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her eyes distant. "People wear their motives like cloaks, Beatrice. Some are bright, like Sir Reginald's, others hidden, like a shadow in the woods. We must keep watching." Her needles clicked on, a quiet counterpoint to the funder's charm, which, she suspected, concealed a truth as elusive as the stolen torque itself. Chapter 5. The Worker's Tale. The morning light filtered through the oaks lining Dunmere's village green, casting dappled shadows on the path where Miss Jane Marple walked, her umbrella tapping the ground in rhythm with her steps. Lady Beatrice Conway had insisted on a stroll to the village to clear their minds after the tension at the dig, but Miss Marple's thoughts were far from idle. The theft of the golden torque had stirred the quiet village like a stone dropped in a still pond, and ripples of suspicion were spreading. Her knitting bag, slung over her arm, bumped gently against her side, a reminder of the threads she was weaving in her mind, threads of motive, opportunity, and human frailty. At the dig, the workers continued their tasks, but the air was heavy with unease, as if the stolen torque had left a void deeper than its absence. Miss Marple, pausing by the village post office to let Beatrice exchange pleasantries with the postmistress, turned her gaze toward the meadow below Conway Hall. There, Tom Brodie was hauling a wheelbarrow of earth, his broad shoulders hunched under the weight. His patched jacket and worn boots spoke of a life scraped together, and Miss Marple, with her keen eye for detail, noted the way his hands gripped the handles, knuckles pale with effort or nerves. In St. Mary Mead, she had known a gardener's boy whose calloused hands hid a theft born of desperation. Tom's demeanor suggested a similar burden, though whether guilt or fear she could not yet say. Beatrice rejoined her, her face flushed from the brisk walk. "Jane, the village is all aflutter," she said, her voice low. "The postmistress says Tom was seen at the pub last night, looking jittery, and there's talk he's got debts. His mother's been ill, poor thing." Her tone was sympathetic, but Miss Marple caught the undercurrent of suspicion, as if Beatrice half expected Tom to be the thief. "Debts can weigh heavily," Miss Marple said mildly, her eyes following Tom as he set down the wheelbarrow and wiped his brow. "But they don't always make a thief. In St. Mary Mead, a young clerk owed money to a bookmaker, yet he never stole, only worked harder to pay it off." Her voice was soft, but her mind was sharp, sifting through the village gossip like a prospector panning for gold. They approached the dig, where Dr. Evelyn Hart was directing workers with a clipped efficiency that bordered on agitation. The village constable, Perkins, was there too, his notebook open as he questioned Tom near the main tent. Miss Marple, lingering at a discreet distance, adjusted her hat and listened, her unassuming presence allowing her to fade into the background like a shadow on the grass. "You're sure you locked the tent proper, Brody?" Perkins asked, his tone plodding but insistent. "No mistakes now. That lock was smashed clean, and you were the last to touch it." Tom's face reddened, his hands twisting the hem of his jacket. "I swear it, Mr. Perkins. I turned the key meself, like always, and gave it to Dr. Hart. I checked the flap twice afore I left." His voice was earnest, but Miss Marple noted the way. His eyes darted to Evelyn, who was watching from a nearby trench, her spectacles glinting. Was it loyalty to his employer or fear of her judgment? Perkins scratched his head, his pencil hovering over the notebook. "And you saw no one lingering about? No strangers? No odd noises?" His questions were routine, but Miss Marple's ears pricked at Tom's hesitation, a brief pause that spoke louder than his words. "Well?" Tom shifted his weight, his boots scuffing the dirt. "There was that fella I mentioned, in the dark coat, a few nights back. Near the woods he was, just watching. I told Dr. Hart, but she said it was likely Mr. Gray, doing his scholarly business." His tone was uncertain, and Miss Marple, her hands resting on her umbrella, recalled a St. Mary Mead farmhand who had seen a stranger near a barn fire, only to learn it was his own cousin, up to no good. Tom's stranger, she suspected, was no phantom. Perkins jotted a note, his face creased with doubt. "Right, I'll have a word with Mr. Gray. But you're sure you didn't leave that key where someone could nab it?" His question was blunt, and Tom flinched, his hands clenching. "I'm no fool, sir," he said, his voice rising. "I did my job proper." But his eyes flicked to the ground, and Miss Marple, standing quietly, saw the shadow of doubt cross his face. Poverty, she knew, could make even the honest tremble under scrutiny, and Tom's threadbare appearance suggested a life where temptation might lurk. Evelyn approached, her face tight with impatience. "Perkins, Tom's told you all he knows. Let him get back to work. We're behind as it is." Her tone was sharp, protective, and Miss Marple noted the way Tom's shoulders relaxed slightly at her defense. Was Evelyn shielding a loyal worker, or covering for a mistake, or something more? As Perkins trudged off to question another worker, Miss Marple stepped closer to Tom, her smile as gentle as a spring breeze. "You've a heavy load, Tom," she said, gesturing to the wheelbarrow. "And a heavy heart, perhaps, with all this trouble. It must be hard being under such suspicion." Her voice was kind, but her eyes were keen, watching for the truth beneath his words. Tom's grin was lopsided, almost boyish, but his eyes were wary. "Aye, miss, it's not easy. I just want to do right by Dr. Hart. She's been good to me, giving me work when times was tough." He paused, his gaze dropping to his boots. "I didn't take that torque, I swear it, but folks look at me like I did, 'cause I'm just a worker, nothing fancy. His bitterness was fleeting, but Miss Marple caught it, like a note struck off-key. "I believe you mean that, Tom," she said softly. "But sometimes what we see, or don't see, can tell a story. That man in the dark coat, for instance. Did he speak to anyone or just watch?" Her question was casual, but her mind was alert, piecing together the fragments of Tom's tale. Tom shrugged, his hands fidgeting. "Just watched, far as I could tell. It was dusk, hard to see clear. But he wasn't one of us, too fancy-like. Had a hat, pulled low." His description was vague, but Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Lionel Gray, whose scholarly air and reclusive habits made him a likely candidate for such a figure. In St. Mary Mead, a quiet man in a fine coat had once been caught pilfering from a church collection. Appearances, she knew, could deceive. Beatrice, joining them, touched Miss Marple's arm. "Jane, Evelyn's taking us to see the new trench. They've found a bronze dagger. Come along." Her enthusiasm was genuine, but Miss Marple sensed her friend's need to escape the dig's oppressive atmosphere. She followed, but not before giving Tom a nod, her eyes lingering on his tense posture. He was a good lad, she thought, but good lads could be swayed by need or pressure. At the trench, Evelyn explained the dagger's significance, her voice regaining its academic fervor, but Miss Marple's attention wandered to the dig's perimeter, where the woods loomed dark and silent. The stranger Tom had seen, she mused, had chosen a vantage point where he could observe without being noticed. Was it Gray, scouting his prize, or someone else entirely? Her thoughts were interrupted by the rumble of Sir Reginald Vance's car departing, his loud farewell echoing across the meadow. His absence, she noted, seemed to ease the workers' tension, as if his presence were a weight they bore reluctantly. Back at Conway Hall for tea, Beatrice poured out her worries over scones and clotted cream. "Jane, Tom's story about that stranger bothers me," she said, her rings clinking against her cup. "He's so jumpy, and with his mother's illness, who knows what he might do for money. But then, Sir Reginald's been pushing Evelyn, awfully hard, almost as if he blames her for the theft." Her voice dropped, conspiratorial. "Do you think Tom could have slipped somehow?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression serene. "Tom's a simple soul, Beatrice, but simple souls can be loyal to a fault, or they can be tempted if the need is great." She paused, her eyes distant. "In St. Mary Mead, a young man once took a silver spoon from a manor house, not for greed, but to pay a doctor's bill. Tom's tale rings true, but his nerves suggest he knows more than he's saying. Perhaps not about the theft, but about what he saw." Her needles, now in her hands, clicked softly, a counterpoint to her thoughts. Beatrice leaned forward, her eyes wide. "You think that stranger is the key? That Mr. Gray, perhaps, sneaking about?" Her voice was eager, but Miss Marple's smile was cautious. "People reveal themselves in their silences, Beatrice," she said. "Tom's stranger, Sir Reginald's bluster, Evelyn's strain, they're all pieces of a puzzle. We must be patient and let the picture form." Her needles moved steadily, but her mind was a loom, weaving Tom's tale into the growing tapestry of Dunmere's secrets, where a golden torque had become the thread that bound suspicion to truth. Chapter 6. The Collector's Shadow. The late afternoon sun dipped low over Dunmere, painting the village in hues of amber and casting long shadows from the ancient oaks that fringed the meadow. Miss Jane Marple, seated in Lady Beatrice Conway's chauffeured car, gazed out at the rolling hills as they approached the imposing gates of Grey Manor, the home of Lionel Grey, the reclusive collector whose name had surfaced like a persistent echo in the mystery of the stolen torque. Beatrice, adjusting her gloves with a nervous flutter, had insisted on a visit, ostensibly to invite Grey to a gathering at Conway Hall, but Miss Marple sensed her friend's curiosity and unease about the man who collected artifacts with a zeal bordering on obsession. Her knitting bag rested on her lap, the faint clink of needles a quiet reminder of the threads she was weaving in her mind. The manor loomed at the end of a gravel drive, its gray stone facade stern and unwelcoming, like a fortress guarding secrets. Ivy clung to the walls, and the windows, narrow and leaded, seemed to watch their approach with silent scrutiny. Miss Marple, stepping out of the car, noted the air of neglect, a cracked urn by the steps, a garden overgrown with thistles, yet the heavy oak door gleamed with polish, as if its owner cared only for what lay within. In St. Mary Mead, she had known a widow whose pristine parlor hid a hoard of stolen trinkets. Grey's manor, she suspected, held more than scholarly treasures. A butler, gaunt and silent, ushered them into a dimly lit hall where the air was thick with the scent of old wood and wax. Artifacts lined the walls, a Roman bust, its eyes blank, an Egyptian scarab in a glass case, a Celtic bronze shield, its patina gleaming under a chandelier. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her mild expression, took in the meticulous arrangement, each piece labeled with a scholar's precision. Yet there was something cold, almost possessive, in the display, as if these objects were not studied but claimed. Lionel Grey greeted them in a drawing room cluttered with books and curios, his tall, spare frame moving with the deliberate grace of a man accustomed to solitude. His hair was iron gray, his eyes a pale blue that seemed to pierce rather than see, and his smile, though polite, was as thin as a winter frost. "Lady Beatrice, a pleasure," he said, his voice low and measured. "And Miss Marple, is it?" "From St. Mary Mead, I hear. A quaint village, no doubt." His tone was courteous, but Miss Marple caught the faint condescension, like a St. Mary Mead scholar who dismissed village gossip as beneath him, only to miss its truths. Beatrice, undeterred, launched into her invitation. "We're hosting a small gathering at Conway Hall, Mr. Grey, to discuss the dig's future after this dreadful theft. Your expertise would be invaluable." Her words were warm, but Miss Marple noted the way her friend's fingers twisted her gloves, betraying her discomfort under Grey's unblinking gaze. Grey inclined his head, his fingers brushing a jade figurine on the table beside him. "Kind of you, Lady Beatrice, but I'm a private man. My work keeps me here, with my collection." His eyes flickered to a locked cabinet in the corner, its glass door revealing only shadows within. Miss Marple, sipping the tea offered by the silent butler, recalled a St. Mary Mead spinster whose locked cupboard hid rare books pilfered from a library. Grey's cabinet, she mused, might hold secrets of a different sort. "The Torse's loss must be a blow to a scholar like yourself," Miss Marple said, her voice soft as a breeze. "You visited the dig, I understand, not long before it vanished." Her tone was conversational, but her eyes were keen, watching the slight tightening of Grey's jaw, the way his fingers paused on the figurine. "Indeed," Grey said, his smile unwavering, but his eyes colder. "I saw the torque, a remarkable piece, 5th century Celtic, likely ceremonial. Dr. Hart was kind enough to show me her notes. But I'm no thief, Miss Marple, if that's what you're implying." His voice was smooth, but Miss Marple caught the edge, like a blade hidden in silk. He leaned back, his long fingers steepled, and added, "History belongs in safe hands, not public displays where it's at risk. Museums lose things, private collections preserve them." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "A noble sentiment, Mr. Gray, though some might say a private collection hides history from those who'd learn from it." Her words were gentle, but her mind was alert, noting the way Gray's eyes flicked again to the locked cabinet. In St. Mary Mead, a retired colonel had spoken of preserving rare coins while selling them to dubious dealers. Gray's passion, she suspected, had a darker shade. Beatrice, sensing the tension, gestured to a marble bust on a pedestal. "Your collection is extraordinary, Mr. Gray. Have you always been so devoted to antiquities?" Her question was meant to ease the mood, but Miss Marple saw the collector's shoulders relax slightly, as if relieved to shift the conversation. "Since I was a boy," Gray said, his tone warming. "My father was a diplomat, you see, and we traveled Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia. I learned early that history is fragile, easily lost to war or carelessness. I've spent my life ensuring it endures." He gestured to a shelf of leather-bound journals, his voice taking on a lecturer's cadence. "Every piece here has a story, documented and protected." Miss Marple, setting down her teacup, tilted her head. "And the Torca's story? You must have been eager to document it, having seen it so recently." Her question was innocent, but her eyes missed nothing. The way Gray's fingers twitched, the brief flicker of unease in his pale gaze. "Its story is incomplete," he said, his voice cool again. "A chieftain's treasure, perhaps, or a priest's offering. I'd have liked to study it further, but Dr. Hart was protective." His lips curled slightly, as if the word amused him, and Miss Marple noted the hint of disdain. Was it for Evelyn's caution, or something more personal? As they rose to leave, Gray escorted them to the hall, his manners impeccable, but his eyes distant, as if his thoughts were elsewhere. Miss Marple paused by a glass case containing a bronze dagger, its blade etched with faint spirals. "This is Celtic, isn't it?" she asked, her voice curious. "Much like the Torque, I imagine." Gray's smile was tight. "Similar period, yes, but far less rare. The Torque was unique." His emphasis on the word was slight, but Miss Marple caught it, like a false note in a hymn. She thanked him for the tea, her smile as mild as ever, but her mind was a loom, weaving Gray's words and glances into the growing pattern of Dunmere's mystery. Back at Conway Hall, as twilight settled over the village, Beatrice paced the drawing room, her hands fluttering. "Jane, he's an odd man, isn't he? All that talk of preserving history, but those eyes, so cold. Do you think he could have taken the Torque for his collection?" Her voice was eager, almost hopeful, as if pinning the crime on Gray would tidy the matter. Miss Marple, her needles clicking as she resumed her shawl, smiled faintly. "Mr. Gray is a man of passion, Beatrice, but passion can twist into obsession. In St. Mary Mead, a woman collected rare flowers, claiming to save them, but she uprooted them from others' gardens. Mr. Gray's love for artifacts may be genuine, but his methods—" She paused, her eyes distant. "That locked cabinet. I wonder what it holds." Beatrice sank into a chair, her eyes wide. "You think the torse is there, hidden in his manner?" Her voice dropped to a whisper, as if Gray's shadow lingered in the room. Miss Marple's needles moved steadily. "I think, Beatrice, that people like Mr. Gray guard their secrets as fiercely as their treasures. But secrets, like shadows, have a way of revealing themselves in the right light. Her smile was serene, but her mind was sharp, turning over Gray's cold precision, Tom's nervous tale, Evelyn's strain, and Sir Reginald's bluster. The torque, she knew, was a magnet for desire, and Lionel Gray's shadow loomed larger than most in the puzzle of its disappearance. Chapter 7. Whispers in the Village. The evening air in Dunmere carried a chill, as if the village itself shivered at the scandal of the stolen torque. Miss Jane Marple, seated by the fire in Lady Beatrice Conway's drawing-room at Conway Hall, worked her knitting needles with a steady rhythm, the soft click a counterpoint to the murmur of village gossip that had followed them home. Beatrice, her silver hair catching the firelight, paced before the hearth, her hands clasped as she recounted the day's whispers, gleaned from a visit to the village shop and a chance encounter at the church gate. The theft had set tongues wagging, and every villager, it seemed, had a theory about the culprit. Miss Marple, her eyes mild but sharp, listened, her mind sifting through the chatter like a gardener separating weeds from flowers. "Jane, it's astonishing how much talk there is," Beatrice said, pausing to adjust a vase of roses on the mantel. "Mrs. Tuttle at the shop swears, Doctor. Hart's been acting queerly. Says she saw her burning papers in her cottage garden last week. And then there's Sir Reginald, throwing his weight about, hinting he might pull his funding if the torque isn't found soon." Her voice was indignant, but Miss Marple noted the flicker of worry in her friend's eyes, as if the village's unrest mirrored her own. Miss Marple's needles paused, her head tilting slightly. "Burning papers, you say? That's curious, Beatrice, though in St. Mary Mead, I knew a schoolteacher who burned old letters to hide a harmless flirtation, not a crime. Still, it's worth noting." Her tone was gentle, but her mind was alert, adding Evelyn's secretive act to the growing tapestry of clues. Beatrice nodded, sinking into a chair. "And that's not all. Young Tom Brodie was at the pub last night, according to the baker's wife, and he had a roll of banknotes, more than a worker like him ought to have. She says he paid for a round of drinks, looking nervous as a cat." Her voice dropped, conspiratorial. "Do you think he sold the torque, Jane? He's a good lad, but with his mother's illness, who knows what he might do?" Miss Marple's smile was serene, her needles resuming their rhythm. "Money in a poor man's hands always draws eyes, Beatrice. In St. Mary Mead, a grocer's boy flashed a few shillings and was accused of theft, but it turned out he'd won them at cards. Tom's banknotes may have an innocent source, or they may not." Her eyes twinkled, but her thoughts turned to Tom's nervous glances at the dig, his story of a stranger in a dark coat. Was he hiding a windfall, or merely the fear of suspicion? The drawing-room door creaked open, admitting a maid with a tray of tea and biscuits. Miss Marple thanked her, noting the girl's hesitant glance toward the window, where the lights of Dunmere twinkled in the gathering dusk. "You've heard the talk in the village, I expect," Miss Marple said kindly, as the maid poured tea. "It must be unsettling, with such a theft so close." The maid, a young woman with a freckled face, blushed. "Oh, aye, miss. Everyone's saying it's a curse, that torque. Old Mr. Caulfield, the night watchman, swears he heard odd noises the night it was took, rustlin' in the woods like, and—" She hesitated, her hands trembling slightly on the teapot. "I saw a man meself, miss, near the dig, that same night. Dark coat, movin' quiet. Looked like Mr. Gray's coat, the one he wears when he visits. Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly, though her expression remained mild. Did you now? And did you tell Doctor, Hart, or the constable? Her question was soft, but her mind was sharp, filing away this new thread, which matched Tom's tale of a shadowy figure. The maid shook her head, her cheeks reddening further. No, miss, didn't want to make trouble. Mr. Gray's a gentleman, ain't he? But it gave me a turn, seeing him so late. She bobbed a curtsy and hurried out, leaving Miss Marple to sip her tea, her thoughts turning to Lionel Gray's cold eyes and locked cabinet. In St. Mary Mead, a quiet man seen lurking near a stolen bicycle had turned out to be innocent, but his secrecy had fueled suspicion. Gray's nocturnal wanderings, if true, were a piece of the puzzle that demanded closer scrutiny. Beatrice, stirring her tea, leaned forward. Jane, did you hear that? Gray, near the dig at night? It's too much of a coincidence, surely. Her voice was eager, but Miss Marple raised a hand, her smile cautioning restraint. Coincidences are like shadows, Beatrice. Sometimes they point to the truth, sometimes they mislead. We must be careful not to jump to conclusions. Her needles clicked, a steady rhythm as she considered the maid's words. Gray's interest in the torque was clear, but was he bold enough to steal it under cover of darkness? Or was the dark-coated figure someone else, cloaked in the village's fear? The conversation turned to the village's other whispers, each one a thread in Miss Marple's mental loom. The blacksmith claimed Sir Reginald had been seen arguing with Evelyn at the dig 2 days before the theft, his voice raised about wasted funds. System. The system has detected that the generated content may be too long and has been truncated to stay within reasonable limits. Would you like me to continue generating the rest of Chapter 7, adjust the content to be shorter, or proceed with a different chapter? Please let me know your preference. Chapter 8. The trap is set. The drawing room of Conway Hall glowed with the soft warmth of lamplight, casting flickering shadows on the oak-paneled walls as Miss Jane Marple sat knitting, her needles moving with the quiet precision of a metronome. Lady Beatrice Conway, her silver hair slightly disheveled from a day of fretting, paced before the fireplace, her hands clasped tightly. The theft of the golden torque had cast a pall over Dunmere, and the village's whispers had grown into a chorus of suspicion, each note pointing to one of the 4 figures at the heart of the mystery: Dr. Evelyn Hart, Sir Reginald Vance, Tom Brodie, and Lionel Gray. Miss Marple, her mild eyes sharp behind her spectacles, had listened to every rumor, observed every glance, and now, with the clarity of a St. Mary Mead puzzle, she sensed the time had come to draw the threads together. Beatrice, Miss Marple said, her voice soft as she paused her knitting, I believe we should gather everyone at Conway Hall, a small meeting perhaps, to discuss the dig's future. It would be most instructive to see them all together. Her tone was gentle, but her eyes twinkled with purpose, like a gardener spotting the first sprout of a carefully planted seed. Beatrice stopped pacing, her face brightening. A gathering? Oh, Jane, that's brilliant. We'll invite Evelyn, Sir Reginald, Tom, and that queer Mr. Gray. The constable, too, to keep things official. Do you think it'll flush out the thief? Her voice was eager, but Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic, her needles resuming their rhythm. People, Beatrice, reveal themselves when they're pressed, even lightly. In St. Mary Mead, a tea party once uncovered a pilfered brooch, simply because the culprit couldn't resist boasting. Let us see what our guests reveal. Her words were calm, but her mind was a loom, weaving the strands of suspicion into a pattern only she could yet see. The next evening, Conway Hall's dining room was ablaze with candlelight, the long mahogany table set with crystal and silver, though the mood was far from festive. Dr. Evelyn Hart sat rigidly, her spectacles glinting as she sipped her wine, her thin fingers betraying a faint tremor. Sir Reginald Vance, his mustache bristling, dominated the head of the table, his booming voice filling the room with complaints about the dig's security. Tom Brodie, uncomfortable in a borrowed jacket, sat at the table's edge, his calloused hands folded tightly, his eyes darting to Evelyn as if seeking reassurance. Lionel Gray, his pale gaze as cold as the marble busts in his manner, sat opposite Miss Marple, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass with deliberate calm. Constable Perkins, his notebook tucked away, looked out of place among the grandeur, his ruddy face flushed from the warmth of the room. Beatrice, playing the gracious hostess, steered the conversation toward the dig's future, her voice bright but strained. "We must rally around Evelyn," she said, gesturing to the archaeologist. "The Torca's loss is a blow, but the dig has uncovered so much: bronze pins, pottery, that lovely dagger. Surely, Sir Reginald, you'll continue your support?" Her question was pointed, and Miss Marple noted the way Sir Reginald's smile tightened, his eyes narrowing. "Of course, Lady Beatrice," he said, his tone hearty but forced. "But I expect results, not excuses. That Torque was to be my legacy. The museum's, naturally." His slip was subtle, but Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind catching the echo of his earlier possessiveness. In St. Mary Mead, a merchant had spoken of community while hoarding profits. Sir Reginald's legacy, she suspected, was more personal than public. Evelyn's lips thinned, her voice sharp. "We're doing all we can, Sir Reginald. The constables searched the site and my team's working tirelessly. Perhaps if you'd funded better security, we wouldn't be in this mess." Her words were bold, almost defiant, and Miss Marple saw Tom flinch, as if fearing the confrontation. Gray, however, remained still, his eyes fixed on his glass, though a faint smile played at his lips, as if amused by the tension. Constable Perkins cleared his throat, his voice plodding. "We've no new leads, I'm afraid. No footprints, no witnesses, save for young Tom's tale of a stranger in a dark coat. I've spoken to Mr. Gray about it, but he claims he was home that night." His eyes flicked to Gray, who met his gaze with icy composure. "Indeed," Gray said, his voice low and precise. "I'm a scholar, Constable, not a prowler. My interest in the Torque was academic, nothing more." His fingers tightened slightly on his glass, and Miss Marple, her knitting resting in her lap, noted the controlled precision of his movements, like a St. Mary Mead collector who handled stolen books with the same care. It was then that Miss Marple spoke, her voice so soft, it seemed to drift into the room like a breeze. "It's a curious thing, isn't it? How a theft like this requires such knowledge of the tent, the lock, the Torca's very existence. It was no random act, I think, but one planned with care." She paused, her eyes moving from Evelyn's flushed cheeks to Sir Reginald's forced smile, Tom's fidgeting hands, and Gray's icy calm. "I wonder, has anyone heard of a buyer seeking such a piece? A collector, perhaps, with a private museum, willing to pay a fortune?" Her question hung in the air, and Miss Marple watched their reactions with the keenness of a hawk. Evelyn's fingers stilled on her wine glass, her eyes darting to Gray. Sir Reginald coughed, his mustache twitching as he reached for his napkin. Tom's head lowered, his hands clenching under the table. But it was Gray whose reaction was most telling, a slight narrowing of his eyes, his fingers tightening on his glass until the knuckles whitened. In St. Mary Mead, a poacher had betrayed himself with just such a gesture when asked about a missing pheasant. Miss Marple's trap, subtle as it was, had struck a nerve. "No such buyer in Dunmere, I'd wager," Sir Reginald said, his voice overly loud. "Sounds like London talk. Shady dealers, that sort. We're simple folk here." His laugh was forced, and Miss Marple noted the way he avoided Gray's gaze, as if wary of the collector's silence. Evelyn, her voice tight, added, "The torque is too well known now. No one could sell it without drawing attention. It's likely hidden, waiting for the fuss to die down." Her words were logical, but Miss Marple caught the strain in her tone, as if she feared her own reasoning. Tom, speaking for the first time, mumbled, "I ain't heard of no buyer, miss. Just that stranger I saw, in the dark coat." His eyes flicked to Gray, then away, and Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her mind weaving his words into the pattern. The stranger, always the stranger, yet Gray's presence loomed larger with each mention. Beatrice, sensing the tension, steered the conversation to safer ground, offering dessert and praising the dig's recent finds. But Miss Marple's eyes remained on Gray, whose calm had returned, though his fingers still traced his glass with deliberate care. She spoke again, her voice as gentle as a lullaby. "It's strange, isn't it? How a treasure like the torque draws out desires we might not admit, even to ourselves. In my village, a stolen locket revealed a woman's longing for a past she couldn't reclaim. I wonder what the torque means to its thief." The room fell silent, the candles flickering as if stirred by her words. Gray's smile was thin, his eyes meeting hers for a moment before sliding away. "A poetic thought, Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth. "But thieves are often simpler creatures, driven by greed, not sentiment." His words were measured, but Miss Marple sensed the challenge beneath them, like a fencer testing an opponent's guard. As the evening ended, the guests departed. Evelyn with a curt nod, Sir Reginald with a booming farewell, Tom with a shy bob of his head, and Gray with a bow as cold as his manor's stone walls. Beatrice, closing the door behind them, turned to Miss Marple, her eyes wide. "Jane, that was masterful. Did you see Gray's face when you mentioned a buyer? He looked positively cornered." Miss Marple's smile was serene, her needles clicking as she settled by the fire. "People, Beatrice, betray themselves in the smallest ways. A glance, a gesture, a word too carefully chosen. In St. Mary Mead, a thief was caught because he couldn't resist touching a stolen ring. Our trap has been set, and now we must watch where the shadows fall." Her eyes twinkled, but her mind was a loom, weaving the night's revelations into a pattern that pointed, ever so slightly, toward the collector's shadow. Chapter 9. The Collector's Confession. The morning after the gathering at Conway Hall dawned crisp and clear, the Dunmere hills bathed in a light that seemed to sharpen every blade of grass. Miss Jane Marple sat in Lady Beatrice Conway's morning room, her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked on her shawl, the pale wool pooling in her lap like a quiet promise. The dinner had left a residue of tension, like dust settled after a storm, and Beatrice, pouring tea with a clink of porcelain, was still abuzz with the previous night's revelations. "Jane, the way Mr. Gray gripped his glass, it was as if you'd caught him red-handed," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Do you think he'll crack, or is he too clever for that?" Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her eyes drifting to the window where the dig's tents were just visible in the meadow below. "Clever people, Beatrice, often undo themselves by thinking they're above suspicion. In St. Mary Mead, a solicitor once hid stolen funds in plain sight, believing no one would dare question him. Mr. Gray's composure is his shield, but shields can crack under pressure." Her needles paused, her mind weaving the threads of the dinner. Evelyn's strain, Sir Reginald's bluster, Tom's nervous glances, and Gray's icy calm, broken only by that fleeting moment when she'd mentioned a buyer. Beatrice set down her teacup, her rings catching the light. "We must do something, Jane. The village is restless. Mrs. Tuttle says the pub's full of talk about curses and thieves. We can't let this drag on." Her voice was urgent, but Miss Marple's expression remained serene, her thoughts as precise as her stitches. "Patience, Beatrice," she said softly. "The truth is like a buried artifact. It surfaces when the time is right. But perhaps a word with Constable Perkins might help. He should know about the maid's sighting of a man in a dark coat and Tom's matching tail." Her suggestion was mild, but her eyes were sharp, already anticipating the next move in the delicate dance of deduction. By noon, Miss Marple and Beatrice were at the dig, where the workers moved with a subdued energy, their shovels scraping against the earth as if to drown out the whispers of theft. Constable Perkins was there, his notebook open as he spoke to Dr. Evelyn Hart near the main tent. Evelyn's face was pale, her spectacles slipping down her nose as she gestured to a crate of pottery shards. "We're cataloging everything again, Perkins," she said, her voice tight. "If the thief took anything else, we'll know." Miss Marple noted the strain in her posture, like a wire stretched taut, and recalled a St. Mary Mead schoolmistress, whose rigid control masked a fear of disgrace. Perkins, scratching his head, turned as Beatrice approached. "Lady Beatrice, Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat. "No new leads, I'm afraid, but I'm keeping an eye on that Gray fellow after what Tom said about the dark coat." His tone was earnest, but Miss Marple sensed his frustration, like a fisherman casting nets in an empty stream. "Constable," Miss Marple said, her voice soft as a summer breeze, "I understand one of the maids at Conway Hall saw a man in a similar coat near the dig the night of the theft. It might be worth a closer look at Mr. Gray's movements." Her suggestion was gentle, but her eyes were keen, watching Perkins's face light up with renewed purpose. "Aye, that's something," Perkins said, jotting a note. "I'll pay Mr. Gray a visit this afternoon. If he was skulking about, we'll have him." He nodded to Evelyn, who gave a curt nod in return, her hands clenching her notebook. Miss Marple noted the flicker of unease in Evelyn's eyes, fear for her dig or something more personal. As Perkins trudged off, Miss Marple strolled toward the edge of the dig, where Tom Brody was sifting soil, his face flushed with effort. "You've been most helpful, Tom," she said, her umbrella tapping the ground. "That stranger you saw, his coat sounds very like Mr. Gray's, doesn't it? It must have been unsettling, seeing him so near the tents." Her tone was kind, but her question was a probe, testing the lad's memory. Tom's shovel paused, his eyes darting to the woods. "Aye, miss, it was odd. He didn't move like a worker, all quiet and careful. but I can't swear it was Mr. Gray. Too dark to see clear." His voice was earnest, but Miss Marple caught the tremor, like a St. Mary Mead boy who'd seen more than he dared admit. She nodded, her smile encouraging. "You did right to tell the constable, Tom. Small details, you know, often light the way." Her words were gentle, but her mind was sharp, weaving Tom's hesitation with the maid's sighting and Gray's reaction at dinner. The collector's shadow, she thought, was growing darker. That afternoon, Miss Marple suggested a visit to the village pub, where gossip flowed as freely as ale. Beatrice, eager for distraction, agreed, and they settled at a corner table, the air thick with the scent of hops and wood smoke. The landlord, a burly man with a ready smile, served their tea, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. "Heard about the Torque, ladies?" he said, wiping his hands on his apron. "Folks say it's cursed, vanished like it did before, centuries ago. Some reckon Mr. Gray's got it, locked away in that manor of his." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression mild. "Mr. Gray does seem fond of his collection," she said. "Has he been here lately? Talking of the Torque, perhaps?" Her question was casual, but her ears were sharp, catching the landlord's slight hesitation. "Not here, miss, but my lad saw him walking near the dig a few nights back, before the theft. Dark coat, hat low, like he didn't want to be seen." The landlord leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Queer sort, that Gray. Always talking of preserving history, but he don't share it, do he?" Miss Marple nodded, her mind adding this third sighting to the pattern, each thread pointing to the collector's silent presence. Back at Conway Hall, as dusk settled over Dunmere, Miss Marple sat with Beatrice, her knitting a quiet rhythm against the crackle of the fire. "Jane, it's Gray, isn't it?" Beatrice said, her voice urgent. "All these sightings, Tom, the maid, the landlord's boy. He was there, at the dig, that night." Her hands fluttered, but Miss Marple's smile was cautious. "Appearances, Beatrice, can be like mirrors. They show what we expect to see. In St. Mary Mead, a man was blamed for theft because he was seen near the crime, but it was his brother, dressed alike, who was guilty." She paused, her needles clicking. "We must press Mr. Gray, but carefully." The opportunity came the next morning, when Constable Perkins returned from Gray's manor, his face grim. "He denies being near the dig that night," Perkins said, standing in Conway Hall's hall. "Says he was cataloging his collection till late, but I saw a coat in his hall, dark as Tom described, and he got awful cagey when I asked to search his manor." His tone was frustrated, and Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, sensing the crack in Gray's shield. With Beatrice's encouragement, Miss Marple accompanied Perkins back to Gray Manor, her unassuming presence disarming as they were ushered into the collector's study. Gray stood by his desk, his pale eyes cold but wary, like a fox scenting a trap. "Constable, Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth. "To what do I owe this visit?" His fingers rested on a leather-bound journal, and Miss Marple noted the locked cabinet in the corner, its glass door reflecting the morning light. Perkins cleared his throat. "Mr. Gray, we've had reports of a man in a dark coat near the dig the night the Torque was stolen. Matches your coat, sir. Care to explain?" His tone was blunt, and Miss Marple saw Gray's jaw tighten, his composure fraying. "I've told you. I was here," Gray said, his voice icy. "I'm a scholar, not a thief." But his eyes flicked to the cabinet, and Miss Marple, stepping forward, spoke softly. "Mr. Gray, your passion for history is admirable," she said, her tone gentle. "But a treasure like the torque, so rare, so perfect for your collection. It must have been tempting. The maid saw you, Tom saw you, and the landlord's boy, too. All near the dig, in that dark coat." Her words were a net, cast with care, and she saw the flicker of panic in Gray's eyes, like a St. Mary Mead thief caught with a stolen watch. Gray's composure cracked, his voice low and bitter. "It belongs with me," he muttered, his hands clenching. "Museums lose things. Let them gather dust. I preserve them, honor them." He paused, his eyes darting to the cabinet. "Yes, I took it. Forced the lock, hid it here. It's safe, in my vault, where it belongs." His confession was a whisper, but it rang in the room like a bell. Perkins, startled, moved to the cabinet, and Gray, defeated, handed over the key. Inside, the golden torque gleamed, its intricate knots a testament to its ancient power. Miss Marple's smile was serene, her needles still in her bag, but her mind was satisfied, the puzzle complete. "Desire, Mr. Gray," she said softly, "is a dangerous master. In St. Mary Mead, a woman stole a locket for love, but it only brought her shame. Your torque has found its way home." As Perkins led Gray away, Beatrice clutched Miss Marple's arm, her eyes wide. "Jane, you did it. You saw through him." But Miss Marple only smiled, her thoughts already turning to the quiet of St. Mary Mead, where human nature, in all its complexity, waited for her next unraveling. Chapter 10. The Motives Unraveled. The sun rose over Dunmere with a clarity that seemed to cleanse the village of its recent shadows, the hills glowing as if relieved of a burden. In Conway Hall's morning room, Miss Jane Marple sat by a window overlooking the meadow, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm, the pale wool of her shawl growing steadily in her lap. The golden torque, retrieved from Lionel Gray's locked vault, had been returned to Dr. Evelyn Hart's care, and the dig was abuzz with renewed purpose. Lady Beatrice Conway, pouring tea with a steadier hand than in days past, was still marveling at the collector's confession, her silver hair catching the light as she shook her head in wonder. "Jane, it's extraordinary," Beatrice said, setting the teapot down with a gentle clink. "Mr. Gray, of all people, stealing the torque for his private museum. You saw it all, didn't you? From the moment you mentioned that buyer at dinner, you knew he'd crack." Her voice was warm with admiration, but Miss Marple's smile was modest, her eyes drifting to the dig below, where workers moved with a lighter step. "Not quite, Beatrice," she said softly, her needles pausing. "I only saw what people showed me, their glances, their silences, their fears. In St. Mary Mead, a woman once stole a silver spoon, thinking it would save her family, but it was her guilt that betrayed her. Mr. Gray's obsession was his undoing, but we mustn't forget the others. They too had their motives, even if they didn't act on them." Her tone was gentle, but her mind was sharp, unraveling the final threads of the mystery with the precision of a seamstress. Beatrice leaned forward, her teacup cradled in her hands. "The others? You mean Evelyn, Sir Reginald, and Tom? But they're innocent, aren't they? Gray admitted it was him." Her eyes widened as if the idea of lingering suspicion unsettled her. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, the click a quiet counterpoint to her thoughts. Innocent of the theft, perhaps, but not of their own secrets. Human nature, Beatrice, is a tangled thing. Each of them had a reason to want the torque, or to fear its loss. Let me explain, as I see it, and you'll understand how the pieces fit. She settled back, her voice soft but clear, like a storyteller weaving a tale by the fire. "Doctor, heart to begin with," she said, her eyes distant. "She's a woman of fierce ambition, her career built on years of meticulous work. The torque was her triumph, but also her vulnerability. The village whispers spoke of debts from a failed expedition. Old gossip, but not without truth. I saw it in her hands, trembling when she spoke of her reputation, and in her eyes, darting when Sir Reginald pressed her. She feared the theft would ruin her, not just professionally, but personally, as if some past mistake might surface. Yet her anger at the theft was genuine, and her defense of Tom showed loyalty, not guilt. Her motive was fear, Beatrice, but not of stealing, fear of losing all she'd built." Beatrice nodded, her lips pursed. "Poor Evelyn. She's been so strained I thought she might snap. But you're right, she'd never steal her own find. What about Sir Reginald?" Miss Marple's smile was faint, her needles clicking steadily. "Sir Reginald Vance is a man of pride, isn't he? His wealth funds the dig, but his heart craves the glory. He spoke of the torque as his legacy, a slip that revealed more than he meant. In St. Mary Mead, a squire once funded a village hall, then demanded his name on every plaque. Sir Reginald saw the torque as a crown for his reputation, perhaps even his collection, though he'd never admit it. His bluster at dinner, his quickness to blame Tom or Gray, it was all to deflect attention from his own desires. He didn't steal the torque, but his motive was fame, and it made him careless with others' feelings." Beatrice's eyes widened. "You think he wanted the torque for himself, not just the museum?" Her voice was hushed, as if the idea shocked her. "Not quite," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle. "He wanted the prestige it brought, the chance to be seen as a patron of history. But greed for glory can blind a man, and he overlooked the true thief in his midst. His innocence lies in his arrogance, not his virtue." Her needles paused, her eyes twinkling as she turned to the next figure in her tapestry. "And Tom Brodie," she continued, "poor lad, with his patched jacket and worried eyes. The village saw his banknotes at the pub and whispered of theft, but I saw a boy burdened by duty. His mother's illness, as you mentioned, weighs heavily on him. In St. Mary Mead, a young man took to odd jobs to pay for his sister's medicine, and Tom's cash, I suspect, came from similar honest work, perhaps extra hours at the dig, or a favor for a farmer. His nervousness was not guilt, but fear of being blamed, a fear sharpened by Sir Reginald's accusations and Evelyn's dependence on him. His motive was survival, but his heart is loyal." Beatrice sighed, her shoulders relaxing. "I'm glad of that, Jane. Tom's a good soul, even if he's rough around the edges. But how did you know it was Gray, truly? His confession was so sudden." Miss Marple's smile was serene, her needles moving again. "Mr. Gray was the shadow in the puzzle, Beatrice. His cold eyes, his locked cabinet, his talk of preserving history. It all pointed to a man who saw the torque not as a find, but as his own. The maid's sighting, Tom's stranger, the landlord's boy, all placed him near the dig, moving silently, as a collector might when hunting a prize. At dinner, when I spoke of a buyer, his fingers betrayed him, tightening on his glass. In St. Mary Mead, a woman's trembling hands gave away her theft of a brooch. Gray's composure cracked in just such a way. His motive was possession, not for wealth, but for the power of owning history." She paused, her eyes drifting to the window. "He stole the torque not to sell it, but to keep it, hidden in his vault, where he could study it alone. His confession came because he knew the net was closing. Too many saw his shadow, and he couldn't bear the thought of his treasure being lost to a museum's carelessness. Beatrice leaned back, her teacup forgotten. "Jane, you make it sound so simple, yet you saw it all from your knitting. How do you do it?" Her voice was a mix of awe and exasperation, and Miss Marple's laugh was soft, like a breeze through the meadow. "I don't do anything, Beatrice, except watch and listen. People are like books, you see. Their stories are written in their eyes, their hands, their silences. In St. Mary Mead, I've read many such stories, and Dunmere is no different. The torque was the spark, but human nature lit the fire." Her needles clicked, a quiet promise that the puzzle was solved, the motives unraveled. Below, at the dig, Evelyn's team worked with renewed vigor, the torques safely locked in a new strongbox, its golden knots gleaming under guard. Sir Reginald had pledged more funds, his ego soothed by the publicity of the recovery, though Miss Marple suspected he'd claim credit in time. Tom, cleared of suspicion, shoveled earth with a lighter heart, his loyalty to Evelyn unshaken. Gray, facing charges, had retreated into his manor's silence, his collection now under scrutiny. As Beatrice marveled, Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "The world, Beatrice, is a village, and its secrets are never as deep as they seem." She sipped her tea, her mind already turning to the quiet dramas of St. Mary Mead, where another puzzle, no doubt, awaited her gentle unraveling. Chapter 11. The dig resumes. The Dunmere meadows, kissed by a late summer breeze, seemed to breathe easier under a sky of unblemished blue. The archaeological dig, once shadowed by the theft of the golden torque, now hummed with renewed purpose, its workers moving with a quiet determination as if the return of the relic had lifted a curse. Miss Jane Marple, standing at the edge of Conway Hall's terrace, her knitting bag slung over her arm, gazed down at the scene below. The tents, no longer symbols of loss, fluttered gently, and Dr. Evelyn Hart's sharp voice carried across the trenches, directing her team with a vigor that belied her recent strain. Miss Marple's needles, tucked away for the moment, itched to be taken up, but her eyes were busy, noting the subtle shifts in the dig's rhythm, the way hope had replaced suspicion. Lady Beatrice Conway joined her, her silver hair gleaming as she adjusted her wide-brimmed hat. "Jane, it's a miracle, isn't it?" she said, her voice warm with relief. "The dig's alive again, and Evelyn's herself at last. You've saved it all, you know, unraveling that dreadful business with Mr. Gray." Her hands fluttered, a gesture of gratitude, but Miss Marple's smile was modest, her eyes twinkling as she surveyed the meadow. "I merely pointed the way, Beatrice," she said softly, her voice as gentle as the breeze. The truth was there, waiting to be seen, like a coin in the grass. In St. Mary Mead, a lost locket was found because a maid noticed a glint in the hedge. People's actions, their little habits, tell the story if you watch closely. Her words were calm, but her mind was still weaving, tying up the final threads of Dunmere's drama. Below, Evelyn Hart stood by a trench, her spectacles catching the sunlight as she examined a newly uncovered bronze clasp. Her thin frame, once taut with worry, now moved with purpose, her notebook open as she jotted observations. Miss Marple noted the steadiness of her hands, the way her voice carried authority without the edge of desperation. The torque, now secured in a new iron strongbox under constant guard, had restored her confidence, though Miss Marple suspected Evelyn's fears, of debts, of failure, would linger. like shadows at dusk. Sir Reginald Vance's Rolls-Royce rolled into view, its chrome glinting like a boast. The funder stepped out, his portly figure clad in a suit that strained at the waist, his mustache quivering with self-satisfaction. "Evelyn," he called, striding toward her with the air of a conquering hero. "I've just spoken to the museum board. They're thrilled about the Torca's recovery. I've pledged another 10,000 to keep this dig going. We'll make history yet." His voice boomed, drawing glances from the workers, and Miss Marple saw Evelyn's lips tighten, though she nodded politely. In St. Mary Mead, a pompous merchant had once taken credit for a village fete's success, though others did the work. Sir Reginald, she thought, was cut from similar cloth. Beatrice frowned, her fan pausing. "He's insufferable, Jane, claiming the spotlight as if he found the torque himself. But at least his money will help Evelyn." Her tone was grudging, and Miss Marple's smile was faint, her eyes noting the way Sir Reginald clapped a worker on the shoulder, his gesture more possessive than encouraging. "Money buys influence, Beatrice," she said, her voice soft. "But it rarely buys truth. Sir Reginald's pride is his motive, and he'll bask in the Torque's glory. But it's Evelyn's work that shines." Her gaze shifted to Tom Brodie, who was shoveling earth nearby, his patched jacket less conspicuous now that suspicion had lifted. His face, once clouded with worry, was bright with effort, and Miss Marple saw the loyalty in his steady rhythm, his glances toward Evelyn full of quiet respect. Tom, cleared of blame, had returned to his tasks with a vigor that spoke of relief. The village's whispers about his banknotes had faded, replaced by grudging apologies from those who doubted him. Miss Marple, watching him pause to wipe his brow, recalled a St. Mary Mead lad whose honesty was questioned until a lost purse was found in a ditch. Tom's cash, she'd learned from a discreet inquiry to the pub landlord, had come from extra work mending fences for a local farmer, a small truth that had silenced the gossip. At the dig's edge, a new guard stood watch, a burly man hired by Evelyn to ensure no further thefts. The Torque, now the centerpiece of the dig's finds, was to be sent to the county museum under armed escort, a precaution that eased the village's fears of curses and shadows. Miss Marple, her umbrella tapping the ground, noted the guard's alertness, a stark contrast to old Mr. Caulfield's drowsy vigilance. The dig, she thought, had learned its lesson, but human nature would always tempt fate. Beatrice, following her gaze, sighed. "It's a shame about Mr. Gray, isn't it? Such a scholarly man, ruined by his own greed. They say his manor's locked tight now, and the constable's cataloging his collection for evidence." Her voice held a trace of pity, but Miss Marple's expression was thoughtful, her mind turning to the collector's cold eyes and locked vault. "Mr. Gray's passion was his prison, Beatrice," she said, her voice gentle. "In St. Mary Mead, a woman hoarded rare books, thinking they gave her purpose, but they only isolated her. Mr. Gray's Torque was his dream, but it chained him to his own desires. He'll face justice and perhaps find peace in letting go." Her words were kind, but her eyes were sharp, seeing the collector's fate as a mirror of Dunmere's brief turmoil. As they walked back to Conway Hall, Beatrice linked arms with Miss Marple, her step lighter. "You've saved the dig, Jane, and the village's spirit. Evelyn's talking of a new trench, and the workers are hopeful again. How do you do it, seeing through people like that?" Her voice was warm, almost teasing, and Miss Marple's laugh was soft, like a breeze through the oaks. "I don't see through people, Beatrice," she said, her eyes twinkling. "I only watch what they show me, their fears, their hopes, their silences. A village is a small world, and Dunmere's no different from Saint Mary Mead. The torque was a spark, but people's hearts lit the fire." She paused, her umbrella tapping the path. "Now, I must pack my knitting and catch the afternoon train. St. Mary Mead will have its own dramas waiting, I'm sure." Beatrice squeezed her arm, her eyes shining. "You'll come back, Jane, won't you? Dunmere's better for having you." But Miss Marple only smiled, her thoughts already drifting to her quiet cottage, where the roses needed pruning and the village's secrets awaited her gentle unraveling. Below, the dig continued, its rhythm steady as the heartbeat of the earth. Evelyn's voice rang out, calling for a new crate, and Tom's shovel struck the soil with purpose. The torque, safe at last, gleamed in its strong box, a relic of the past that had tested the present. Miss Marple, turning back to Conway Hall, felt the satisfaction of a puzzle solved, her needles ready for the next thread in life's endless tapestry. Chapter 12. The Quiet Departure. The Dunmere Station, a modest platform nestled between hedgerows and ancient oaks, was bathed in the soft glow of a late summer afternoon. Miss Jane Marple stood by her suitcase, her knitting bag slung over her arm, the faint clink of needles a quiet echo of the mystery now resolved. The golden torque safely returned to Doctor. Evelyn Hart's care had restored peace to the village, and the dig below Conway Hall hummed with renewed purpose. Lady Beatrice Conway, her silver hair catching the sunlight, stood beside her, her face a mix of gratitude and reluctance as the train's distant whistle signaled its approach. "Jane, I can't bear to see you go," Beatrice said, her hands fluttering as she adjusted her scarf. "Dunmere owes you so much, Evelyn's dig, Tom's good name, the torque itself. You've worked a miracle, truly." Her voice was warm, but Miss Marple's smile was modest, her eyes drifting to the hills where the meadow lay, its tents a testament to the village's resilience. "I've done nothing, Beatrice, except listen," she said softly, her voice as gentle as the breeze stirring the hedgerows. "People tell their stories in their actions, their silences, their fears. In St. Mary Mead, a missing teapot was found because a maid couldn't stop glancing at a cupboard. Dunmere's torque was no different. It spoke through those who coveted it." Her eyes twinkled, but her mind was already turning to her quiet cottage, where the roses needed tending and the village's small dramas awaited. Beatrice clutched her arm, her eyes shining. "But you saw it all, Jane. Gray's obsession, Evelyn's strain, Sir Reginald's bluster. How do you do it, picking out the truth? Like that?" Her tone was almost pleading, as if seeking the secret to Miss Marple's gentle clarity. Miss Marple's laugh was soft, like a ripple on a pond. "I don't pick out the truth, Beatrice. I merely watch it unfold, like a pattern in my knitting. Human nature is the same everywhere. Greed, loyalty, pride, fear. The torque was a mirror, reflecting what each heart held. Mr. Gray's desire for possession, Evelyn's fear of ruin, Sir Reginald's hunger for glory, Tom's quiet loyalty. They all told me who they were." She paused, her umbrella tapping the platform. "A village, you see, is a world in miniature, and Dunmere's secrets were no deeper than St. Mary Mead's." The train's whistle grew louder, its smoke curling above the trees as it rounded the bend. Beatrice, her face softening, handed Miss Marple a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "A little gift, Jane, some Dunmere honey from the apiary near the dig. something sweet to remember us by. Her smile was warm, but her eyes held a trace of sadness, as if she feared the village would dim without Miss Marple's presence. Miss Marple tucked the parcel into her bag, her smile serene. "How kind, Beatrice. I shall think of Dunmere when I taste it, and of your friendship." Her words were simple, but her eyes were warm, acknowledging the bond forged in the shadow of the Torca's theft. As the train pulled in, its brakes hissing, Miss Marple glanced back at the meadow one last time. The dig was a hive of activity, Evelyn's sharp voice directing workers, Tom's shovel striking the earth with steady rhythm, the new guard standing watch by the strongbox. Sir Reginald's car was absent, but Miss Marple knew his pledges would keep the dig alive, his pride satisfied by the Torca's recovery. Lionel Gray's manor, hidden behind the hills, was silent now, its owner facing justice, his collection under scrutiny. The village, freed from its whispers of curses, had settled back into its quiet routines, though Miss Marple suspected its gossip would linger, embellishing her role in the tale. The porter took her suitcase, and Beatrice squeezed her hand. "You'll come back, won't you, Jane? Dunmere's not the same without you." Her voice was earnest, but Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic, her thoughts already drifting to St. Mary Mead. "If Dunmere needs me, Beatrice, I'll be here," she said, her tone gentle. "But villages, like people, find their way when the shadows clear." She stepped onto the train, her knitting bag bumping against her side, and found a seat by the window. As the engine chugged to life, she opened her bag, her needles gleaming in the sunlight. The rhythm of their click was a promise, a quiet assurance that wherever she went, human nature would offer its puzzles, and she would unravel them with the same gentle clarity. Beatrice waved from the platform, her figure growing smaller as the train pulled away. Miss Marple gazed out at the Dunmere Hills, their green slopes a canvas of memory, the Torca's golden knots, Gray's cold eyes, Evelyn's trembling hands, Tom's earnest loyalty. Each was a thread in the tapestry of human desire, woven and unwoven in the space of a week. She smiled, her needles moving steadily, and turned her thoughts to St. Mary Mead, where a lost letter or a straying cat would no doubt await her, ready to reveal the next small drama of the human heart.